Everyone. Just caught me reading this graph here about inflation. Hey, it's Emil. It's Emil Guillermo. Emil Amok to you. Welcome to my secret podcast, Emil Amok's Takeout, my takes on all things considerable. We try to do this every day, Monday through Friday. Sometimes we're taped, sometimes we're live. We're live at 2 p.m.-ish Pacific, and it's like an old-timey talk radio show. We look at the news, we talk about the news, we give our opinion, but we're better than the old news talk. We don't take calls. It's just me. We don't take calls. And we're even better than that. We don't have guests, generally. We have like one or two. But it's just me talking, giving my opinion. It's America from the red part of the blue state with a perspective of an Asian American opinion maker. I mean, because that's what I am. I mean, this show is subtitled WDAAT. What does an Asian American think? Because they never ask Asian Americans. They never do. And I'm going to tell you, well, what does an Asian American think about Liz Cheney? What is her appeal? Well, there's a lot of Asian American Republicans. We'll talk about that today. Talking about inflation, I've got this inflation schematic that Paul Krugman put out. And, Paul Krugman is an economist, smart guy. And if you don't know where inflation is right now, at the very least, you can go to the New York Times and Paul Krugman and say, what's the inflation rate now and what is really happening? And that's why I'm going to show that graph and explain that graph in a second. What else? And I'm going to tell you why it may be contrary to what you really feel about what really is happening with inflation. I'll tell you why you feel that. And then I'm going to show you, I just found this out. I was reading the Sunday paper late. It's Tuesday. I'm reading the Sunday paper. And I find out that Pablo Guzman has died. He died on Sunday. And it hit me. Because Pablo Guzman was a kind of role model for me. Whether or not I lived in New York or saw him on TV, I knew of his reputation. I knew of him. And Pablo Guzman, his passing kind of hit me because he was a person of color in the media who came on at a time when they were looking for diversity. And thank goodness, he said, I'm going to leave the young lords and I'm going to go become a TV news guy. And he had a very nice career in television news, although somewhat overshadowed by people like Geraldo, who was slightly more bombastic, slightly more stylish, I guess you could say, but cut from the same cloth. And I think he joins there are all these brown guys in television news. And when you're a brown guy like I was in TV news, and I'm like 5, 6 years, 7 years, 8 years, 10 years younger than these guys, they're kind of like the role models. You say, is there a shot for me? Can I get somewhere in this business? And I remember being in Reno and then Dallas and then San Francisco. And then I knew that people like Pablo Guzman, people like Geraldo, they were kind of leading the way for non-white journalists in TV. And it was, another guy, I think, who passed away, Arnold Diaz. When I saw he died, I mean, they were all this group of Latinos in New York media. That was the top market. So they were kind of like these role model figures for me when I was in television news. And then I realized I didn't want to be like Geraldo, knocking on doors and getting doors slammed in your face. I did a couple of stories like that. I mean, if you're a brown guy and you want to be hard in the news front, you do that. Arnold Diaz was a consumer guy. He did the same thing, doors shutting in his face. Pablo was more, he was kind of like a, formerly with the Young Lords, he was like the PR guy for the gang. And he did everything. He did, he covered mobsters. He did the hard news, soft news. He did it all. General assignment, New York, that's how you do it. But I wanted to do other things, not strictly hard news. I mean, I became a critic. I did things in the arts. So from general assignment, that's where I went. And then, of course, when you're in news, you look at being an anchor maybe. And I tried that for a while too. But ultimately, it's funny. You get to an anchor desk and you find that it's all about like bantering and turning to your left and turning to your right and looking good. And you spend half your time in makeup, more time in makeup than you do researching a story, because you have producers who do the stories and you just sort of fly in and be the face, be the hood ornament for the newscast or the news piece. It wasn't as satisfying. I mean, I guess I can say that now. It's been a while since I anchored either on television, when I was at News Channel 8 in Washington, D.C., or when I was at NPR, at All Things Considered, 89 to 91. That was better, though. NPR is slightly higher level than TV news, at any level of TV news. There's still that part where you're, I'm watching the latest version of CNN in the mornings, and I'm watching Kate Baldwin, in the transitions after they finish the piece, they have her walk off the set, as they go to commercial break, because that's the whole thing, standing anchors and walking. It's still showbiz, right? Which should have been enough to sustain me. Still should have been enough to say, oh, this is still fun, but it wasn't meaty enough in the end, and I left it for newspapers. I left it for first talk radio, where I can give my opinion, and I had to formulate opinions on the spot for the radio talk audience. And then I realized I should write some of this down, and I got into op-eds, and I got op-eds in the USA Today and some big papers, and then I started self-syndicating, going with other syndicates. I became a columnist, and that's how I find myself today, writing for people like the Asian American Legal Defense and Education Fund, writing for the Inquirer.net, the Manila, Philippines, big newspaper there, writing for Oakland Post, community paper, Bay Area. The columnist ranks was the thing that I gravitated to when TV news was kind of shallow. It was fun. It was fun. And, like I was talking about seeing the Chowchilla CNN documentary, a lot of good journalists in television. And I saw some of them pop up in that Chowchilla doc because, you do the documentary and they have, some of the recreated scenes, but they balance that with the interviews they do today with clips of the past of Chowchilla and the kidnapping. And some of them were friends of mine. Evan White, my goodness. I worked with him at KRON when it was an NBC affiliate. He was covering Chowchilla for Channel 7, the ABC affiliate. And then George Osterkamp, who was the KQED television, I believe it had to be TV. KQED TV, the old newsroom show. He was the news director, and he was the main news voice, a news historian, talking about how that story was covered. So, I go way back, from my days as an intern, from my days, working as a young reporter. And, I guess if everything was like KQED FM or KQED TV, which was a very alternative way to do television news, if I had that available to me, I would have stayed. But there wasn't, I know, I found my way toward columning and writing and reported opinion giving, and the op-ed page and the editorial page. And I got into newspapers, and what a time to get into newspapers when the business is falling apart. So now I'm here giving my opinion to you, secret audience. Emil Amok's Takeout, my takes on all things considerable. Okay, so Liz Cheney. I'll give you my opinion on Liz Cheney. I'm still working on the column that I'll put out tomorrow from an Asian American perspective. But basically, Liz Cheney saying she needs you. It's sort of like an Uncle Sam appeal. I need you to join in to save the democracy. And it's appealing. This has been in the works since the January 6th committee ended. The book was coming out. It's now out. I've only read some of it, shared excerpts from, in news reports. The thing that got me is that she's setting herself up. Well, she exposed how her Republican colleagues saw her. She was, and of course, it's a misogynistic view. She was non-deferential. She was too outspoken. She spoke out of turn. And one of them even said that, seeing her having a different view on January 6th and on Trump was like looking at your girlfriend on the other side. And it's a very poignant statement, or her response was poignant, saying, I'm not your girlfriend. But that's the kind of misogyny that someone like Liz Cheney faced. And so I will say this, Liz Cheney had me at hello. I was prepared for her book. It's a little weird seeing her show up in these, strange bedfellas kind of situations, like when she's being interviewed by Rachel Maddow, or when she's making pitches to Democrats or to liberals. I don't know if she's going to go on The Nation or if she's going to go on Democracy Now! But this is an all hands on deck situation. If you are an American and you believe in America, as has been described, this is Liz Cheney's five alarm alert, her 5-alarm signal that democracy needs your help. And it means that Donald Trump cannot be elected again. And they put out the alarm now because if they wait, it's too late, because it's almost insurmountable. Almost. There's still hope. Maybe logic will prevail over the so-called low information voters. But I don't know. I don't know. I mean, I think a lot of people are going to use the misogyny thing to discredit Liz Cheney, and she's going to be seen as a Hillary type, right? The same way people put down Hillary. You'll see people look to Liz Cheney and hang that on her. And, and that may be enough to just nullify her, so she doesn't get the help nor the majority needed to stymie Trump right now. But it's hard to say. you have people today in power, not named Trump, are doing all they can to subvert democracy. There was the Speaker of the House, Mike Johnson, who, if you thought Mike Johnson had some kind of, I don't know, maybe he would be better than McCarthy. No, he's not better than Kevin McCarthy. At least with Kevin McCarthy, you knew that he would just go where the wind blows, as we've seen from his actions. When it helps him to side with Democrats, he will. When it helps him to side with Trump, he will. On balance, he's always with Trump, as you can see after January 6th. I mean, the telltale sign with Kevin McCarthy was what he was willing to do, what he was willing to give up just to claim the speakership, just to be the guy from Bakersfield who was Speaker of the House. So he got the speakership and he lost it because of the foolish concession he made to people that, hey, you can get me out on a vote. Just call for the vote and you get me out. And they said, okay, we'll do that. And they did that. So now Kevin McCarthy is considering maybe not running again. And we just had another congressional leader, Patrick Henry, the Republican who was interim speaker. He said he's not running. Here's the thing about Patrick Henry. He's just 48 years old. He's been there 20 years. I think for a lot of people, maybe that should be it, you know, because a lot of people just want to go to Congress for resume padding. They don't know, you know, what are they doing it for? They want to pad the resume and then go on to do something else. And it's unfortunate because you need some institutionalists. You need some people who know how government works so that you can get them some things done. Otherwise, you get nothing done. That's a sad thing. So, you know, you look at Mike Johnson, who is now the Speaker of the House, and I just saw this on CNN within the hour. He made some kind of statement saying, maybe we should take the January 6th insurrectionists and maybe we should take the video and blur the faces because we don't want their lives harassed. We don't want the DOJ to go after them. And he said that. He mentioned the DOJ, knowing full well that the DOJ, the FBI, they have all these videos already. But maybe this was a sop to the MAGA right to say, hey, we got you covered, or will appear as if we got you covered. But it shows you what some people in power will do to appease the Trump MAGA right, even without Trump, because they're prepared for Trump's return. And you've seen the reporting to date, not just with Liz Cheney's book, but there have been reports all over the media about, well, Trump has said, you know, on day one, he's going to invoke the Insurrection Act. So the president has all these powers. He wants the United States to resemble the Philippines under martial law in the 1970s, which, you know, don't think the United States didn't have some kind of hand in that. You know, the Kissinger mode of foreign policy had to have some, I mean, the U.S. gave the Philippines its blessing. It was anti-communist after all. I mean, that was the excuse for martial law. Oh, we're going to get those insurrectionists in Mindanao. And certainly anti-communism was the goal in foreign policy. Vietnam, China, Asia. The Philippines was on the good side. Fortunately for people like, or for places like Cambodia, Vietnam, the carpet bombing. And that was U.S. policy in action. So I think we watch Liz Cheney when you see her. I answer her call. This is a time when even if you're an Asian American Republican, you've got to consider what the alternative is like, because it's going to be worse in a Donald Trump second term. It's going to be worse, not just for, our individual lives, but just for democracy overall. If you thought it was bad the first time, he's handpicking people to be part of the administration so that it's all these Trump clones who know how to do it after they've had the rehearsal, and they are going to make this last term, if they get this second term, they're going to make it last. That's the fear. Liz Cheney said it last night when she was being interviewed by Rachel Maddow. She said, I looked across at my kids, my sons, and I was hoping that they aren't the last ones to see a peaceful transition of power, because the fear is that Donald Trump, if he loses, or certainly after a second term, you are not. That's it. Your term limited, right? But the expectation is, once in a second term, Donald Trump will not relinquish the presidency. And I think that's a risk that all Americans can't take. So Liz Cheney out on her book tour. Her book is now out. I'm going to try to get to it. I'm just reading excerpts from all the different reports, seeing her speak. It's effective. I hope it works. You're seeing Republicans. I saw a rich Democrat, the guy behind LinkedIn, Reid Hoffman, donate money to Nikki Haley in an effort to try to bolster her chances to defeat Trump. It's nothing new that Democrats, corporate Democrats, they give to both sides, so they're not, loyally partisan. But the fact that he identifies himself as a Democrat giving to Haley, you're going to see that. You're going to see a lot of people doing that as we get closer to Iowa. And frankly, I don't know how Iowans are going to vote. Right now, Trump nationally has higher poll numbers than he does in Iowa, although it's pretty formidable. He still has something like 41 points, which is still higher than his closest rival, Nikki Haley. So maybe he doesn't win. Donald Trump doesn't win as much in Iowa, but you never know how Iowa's going to vote. There's a lot of new voters, and young people are turned off both by Trump and by Biden. Well, they're more turned off by Biden, but if they say, "Oh, Biden's old, that's why we don't like him," look who's not far behind. A morbidly obese man in his upper 70s, not much better than Joe Biden. So we'll see how these next few weeks go. There's a debate tomorrow night. One thing I want to talk about inflation today, because I was noticing in the polls, people get their pollsters out there and they say, look, everyone thinks the number one agenda item is inflation by a wide margin. People don't care about immigration as much, which is really weird because they should. But the polling is showing that immigration is not taking root in the same way. In fact, in one poll, inflation was said to be 41% the most important issue for presidential candidates to talk about. This is a Kaiser Family Foundation, KFF poll, taken October 3rd to November 7th. Inflation, 41%. Guns, 14%. Immigration, 12%. Healthcare, 8%. But inflation by a wide margin, 41%. Now, where's abortion? the Democrats were putting abortion as their issue as of the last election we had in November, and I don't see abortion in there at all. Is that under healthcare? No, 8% only for healthcare, which is odd because Donald Trump is like fighting the last election, 2020, where he's going after, Obamacare. He wants to repeal Obamacare. He didn't do it then. But the big issue is inflation, 41%. That's what people want to talk about. So here's the thing that I want to share with you about inflation, because it's not insignificant. I read Paul Krugman in the New York Times because he's an economist. I'm not an economist. I'd like to be an economist, but I know some academics, and they're kind of down on economists. They don't think economists know anything, and some do and some don't. This is going to show the some do, but it's going to expose the some who don't know what they're talking about. And this is written by Paul Krugman. It's in his newsletter in the Times. He says, over the past 6 months, the personal consumption expenditure deflator, excluding food and energy, that's the PCED, the personal consumption expenditure deflator, excluding food and energy. This is the Federal Reserve's preferred measure of underlying inflation. It's risen at an annual rate of only 2.5%, which is down from 5.7% in March 2022. Hurrah, right? It should be. 5.7% March 2022, 2.5% now. Annual rate. The Fed's inflation target is 2%, so we're not quite there yet, says Krugman. But he says, don't expect the Fed to declare victory anytime soon. He says, I can tell you from personal experience, anyone suggesting that inflation is more or less under control can expect an avalanche of hate mail and hostile commentary on social media. In fact, I believe that the vehemence with which some Americans insist that inflation is still running wild distorts coverage in conventional media too, which is correct, because when you don't cite economists or people who go through the numbers, and you just cite or just interview people and their feelings, people's feelings about inflation are far worse than the actual inflation numbers. And that's just the fact. So when you have politicians talking about it, that's because, when the poll says 41% say talk about inflation, that's their pain point. They want to know what you're going to do to make them feel better. So you got to make them feel better. That's pretty plain. And it can start by saying, hey, look, you felt bad in March 2022. Now it was 5.7%. Now it's down to 2.5. You got to get that point across, because that's the reality. If they're not feeling as good, there's a reason. I'm going to explain why I think that's so. So the problem with all this is that the numbers are fluid, and you don't want to sound too optimistic. In fact, some people want to be pessimistic. And then when you look at that number and it excludes food and energy, Krugman says, okay, well, there are good reasons for policymakers to look at core measures excluding components that jump around a lot, like food and energy. But in case you're interested, he says, prices, including food and energy, have risen at an annual rate of 2.5%, the same as core inflation. So that's good, right? It should be. It should be. It should be good. But, it's all about how people feel. And what Krugman says is remarkable about the progress we've made is that the progress has come without any visible cost. He says, so far, this has been immaculate disinflation, requiring neither a recession nor a large rise in unemployment. Remember, that has always been the fear of economists, that we're going to have these inflation spikes and it's going to hit us. And watch out, we're going to get stagflation, a term that I learned in the 70s. And all stagflation means is you get hyperinflation, high interest rates, and you think it's hard buying a house. We had interest rates up to like 16% at some point in the 70s and 80s. You had high prices. And so you have stagnant growth, high inflation, stagflation, they called it. And so when people saw the signs that, we're going to have inflation, they said, watch out, we're going to have a recession or a large rise in unemployment. But that didn't happen. It didn't happen this time. So clever economists are calling it the immaculate disinflation, with the numbers going down. So what I like is that everyone has a guess about how we're going to come out of this. And there are some who said, yeah, we're going to go through high unemployment. It's going to be terrible. Economists like Lawrence Summers, the former Harvard president, economist under Obama. And that's what he thought. Didn't happen. That was a very pessimistic view. The optimists said, like Krugman said, we could be more positive. And it's right. We didn't have the hyperinflation. And the real world was even better than expected. So the takeaway here is we're doing better than we thought, than all the pros thought, but we're still feeling bad. And why is that? And Krugman says it's probably, people feared that when Biden passed the American Rescue Plan, remember the spending bill that passed, that in the Biden administration that they said that could be inflationary. Well, they said, no, that's not the cause for the inflation we had. Probably the inflation we had to do with the pandemic related disruptions that occurred, not with any kind of overspending that we had in that Biden bill. But the real issue that Krugman points out is that economists, they're kind of like historians. They look at charts, they look to see how things have gone in the past, and they remember how 70s inflation was hard to end, and they saw how this idea of stagflation came in the 70s after high inflation, and they just thought, okay, that's going to happen here. That's why you had all the economists pessimistic, and it didn't happen. It didn't happen. And Krugman said, it's just that, and this is why some academics I know think that economics is just sort of, yeah, there's numbers, yeah, there's graphs, it looks like a science, but it's kind of like there's a lot of touchy-feely stuff too, right? It's like a vibe that people have. And vibes, as Krugman points out, are a poor basis for economic analysis. He writes, indeed, vibe-based predictions of stagflation or vibeflation turn out to have been completely, epically wrong. So you always have to take what economists say with a grain of salt, but they are working with the numbers. They're trying to analyze it. And this is as good an analysis as is out there. I mean, I'm not an economist, but when I need the numbers, I look, and I want someone to sort of like tell me what this means when the inflation rate is March 2022 was at 5 something, 5.7%, and now it's down to 2.5%. That's good. We should be cheering, sort of, right? It's better. But, some people are still going to feel bad about the time they paid X for eggs, a dozen eggs a year ago. They're going to feel bad about the gas, how much they paid in gas, and they're not going to forget it. That's going to be lingering, and it stays with them, the feeling that, oh, something is wrong. It's got to be better. Here's why I think people have their own vibes about inflation. And that's because there are too many billionaires in America. There are too many people who put wealth above everything else, and they leave everyone in the dust. I mean, we live in a society where there's a 1% and a 99%. And the middle class, where are they? I mean, I think that's why we feel, or most people, I put myself in most people. If they feel bad about the economy, it's because they see that there are these millionaires running private jets and doing these things in the corporate world, and they're their own corporate bosses, and they feel left out. I think that's really why the vast majority, because when you say the vast majority of Americans, you're talking about the 99%. I think there's a reason why we get that feeling, and that's because the inequities in society are all too present, and you see it. You go to social media, you look at the pages, the newspapers. You go online, see the stories, see stories about Elon Musk, and you say, unless you are feeling good about yourself, your self-worth, and unless you know that the important thing is how you feel inside and not all the outside extraneous, really irrelevant things, it's hard not to be upset, because we don't have a sense of enough in America. We don't have a sense that, you're making enough. I mean, sometimes it's imposed on us, right? Like, you can't have it. That's why we have a minimum wage, and we're not paying you a dime over that. Sometimes people face discrimination, racism, and they just need to feel good about the country. They need to feel good. And when you're paying more, if you go to the grocery store, you're going away with less, and you're paying more for fewer items. That's bad. I don't know how you're going to turn that around, but you got to, who wants to be president has to make America or Americans feel better about themselves. Because, Biden is always saying, hey, look, I'm a capitalist. But a lot of it is because capitalism is based on, hey, more profit. It's never enough. Keep going for more. I was reading where Spotify is laying off people, because how else do you expand profits except by laying off more people, cutting people, getting to a higher bottom line, because you got to show shareholder value for the stock market. And that is, I think, what's driving people crazy. They can't keep up. And even when we start doing well in our economy, we don't feel good, because everyone else is doing better than us. I think that's why. I don't know exactly how to solve that problem, unless you let people know that there's value in being a strong democracy, pulling for right to free speech, the right to do, the things that make America, America. But so much now we see is tied up into how much money you make, that if you're not growing constantly, just like the corporations insist, you don't feel good about yourself. We don't care about people enough. We care about corporations. So even the hip corporations like Spotify cutting back, firing people during the holidays because they need to improve their bottom line by the end of the fiscal year. That's capitalism. So do we need a different system? Well, we definitely don't need Trumpism, but we could use a sort of kinder capitalism. One thing that helps people feel better about themselves, and this bears out in the polls about, what people want to talk about. They want to talk about inflation because they don't feel good about themselves economically, but they feel good about healthcare. Only 8% say they want to talk about healthcare. I think that's a good thing because it shows that you take care of your people, they'll feel better. So 2024 goes to the candidate who makes Americans feel better about themselves. And that's why maybe Donald Trump keeps buoying up, because he's done it before where he's convinced people to vote against their self-interest, people who are out of it and poor and don't feel like they're listened to. He convinces them that he's for them. He's a populist. And then he cuts taxes to the rich and cuts services to those people who voted for him. And then he just goes off and he caters to the rich and to those people who had hopes. Well, they still have hope. They're loyal. And somehow we have to get across to people that Donald Trump is a snake oil salesman. And who has your best interests at heart? Well, there's a reason why healthcare is only 8% the topic of conversation that people want to talk, because they're happy with Obamacare. They're happy with healthcare. They're happy what Joe Biden, President Obama did. They're happy with that. Well, guess what? Donald Trump wants to take that away from you. Why? Because it doesn't fit the corporate scheme of Donald Trump, or to help the rich, help the corporates. Now, that would be one. If I were on the fence and thinking, oh, maybe I'll vote for Donald Trump. I'm not. But if I were, that would convince me. Does Donald Trump have a better insight on fighting inflation? No. How does he make me feel good about America? Well, he has all these other visceral things that he does. And if you're white, he makes you feel really good about America. But if you're not white, if you're a black, indigenous person of color, and the scary thing is BIPOC communities should be behind Joe Biden way more than they are now. Maybe they will ultimately when it gets scarier. But right now, Donald Trump has decimated the BIPOC coalition to the point where, it seems to be not falling apart, but it's loosening up. And some people are straying and looking around, seeing what Republicans are offering. The Republicans are offering nothing. And they're not even offering a guarantee of democracy. That is the scary thing. So that's the real inflation story. I mean, the takeaway from the real inflation story, and Paul Krugman is he's a credible economist. You may not like his analysis, but go to his facts. Annual percentage rate, or annual rate of inflation, just 2.5%, down from 5.7% in March 2022. That's for the personal consumption expenditure deflator, the PCED, which excludes food and energy. And if you want to know how food and energy did, that was up at 2.5% too. So we're doing better than we were. We still have a ways to go to get to the goal of, we're trying to get to 2%, 2.5%. No, we're trying to get to 2, I think. Below 3. But anything can happen. So we'll see. So that's the inflation story. Let me just segue to Pablo Guzman. Because really, I mean, when I read first of all, Pablo Guzman, I first noticed him in the 70s, early 70s. Leader of the Young Lords, Puerto Rican activist group in East Harlem. And then he became an Emmy-winning television news reporter. He died on Sunday. He was just 73. This is from the New York Times obituary. Pablo Guzman, Puerto Rican activist turned TV newsman, dies at 73. Cause of his death, cardiac arrest. I wonder if he, how many statins he was on. I would guess he's probably not vegetarian. The Young Lords, Guzman helped found in 1969. They were activists in neighborhoods like the South Bronx, East Harlem. They did all these stunts. People called them terrorists at times. The FBI, the New York police spied on them. And because of Guzman, the Young Lords Minister of Communication, the news media, went to him, and he had his big afro, and these guys who were the communications guys, they became very big in New York media. Guzman, Felipe Luciano, Geraldo Rivera. I don't think Geraldo was part of the Young Lords, but that was part of the thing. Part of the Puerto Rican identity, the Black Panthers, and these guys were rising. And they gave voice to a silent group in New York City. And because Guzman was no dummy, he saw he had media skills and street cred, took it into journalism. He started writing for the Village Voice, and then he showed up at WNEW, a Fox affiliate, as a TV reporter, went on to WNBC. And then from 96 to 2013, he was on WCBS as a senior correspondent. He won 2 Emmys. So, as I pointed out, I lived in California. Guzman was all these guys who were Puerto Rican media stars. They were the brown guys in media. People like Guzman, Geraldo Rivera, Felipe Luciano. You knew them by reputation because there was no one of color in the late 60s, 70s in television news. I mean, you could think, I'm going to go on there someday. But really, until Geraldo made it, and Geraldo was a lawyer for the Young Lords before becoming a TV reporter. They broke the mold. They said, hey, look, you can be the voice of a community, and people see you as a person they can talk to. You can go places where a lot of other reporters couldn't go. You can go into the hood, you can get information, and then you end up being like the translator of your community for the broader community. And this is what they were. And so for someone like myself, a Filipino kid growing up in San Francisco, watching the local news, thinking, yeah, I could do that. I mean, I would watch movies and say, oh, no, I can't be a movie star. Oh, we wouldn't go to plays. Didn't have the money to go to plays. But we'd see movies, and none of the movies had Filipino stories. So, I couldn't do that. But I saw television news. Oh, yeah, I could do that. So this was Pablo Guzman's story. The obit says Paul Guzman was born in Manhattan in 1950 to Raul and Sally Guzman. His father was a department store manager, his mother an office worker for Citibank. So they were kind of comfortably middle class. He grew up straight and narrow, according to the obit. Altar boy at Our Lady of Pity in the Bronx, went to Bronx High School of Science, no dummy. Elite high school, enrolled at State University of New York at Old Westbury in Long Island. Married a woman of Irish descent, Debbie Corley. During his freshman year, he went to Mexico, where he discovered his Latino identity. He grew his hair into an afro and began going by Pablo instead of Paul. He changed his name legally from Paul to Pablo, and then didn't finish his degree, turned to street activism. And he wrote in the Village Voice in 1984, most of us in the United States did not know what we were, describing his generation of Puerto Ricans. We tended to identify according to our skin color, with being white or being black. And I remember, Puerto Ricans, this is one of the sad things about the Spanish-American War, right? The Puerto Ricans were kind of like the East Coast Filipinos, or the Filipinos were the East Coast or the West Coast Puerto Ricans. And so when I went to New York in the 70s, yeah, I saw a lot of Puerto Ricans acting black, not necessarily acting white, and not necessarily acting Puerto Rican. Guzman joined a small group of like-minded young activists, mostly Puerto Ricans, to form the Sociedad de Albizu Campos, and they found out about an organization in Chicago, the Young Lords, and started their version, a street gang. And by the end, under the influence of the Black Panthers, they had reformed themselves as political agitators. In 1969, Guzman and others drove to Chicago to meet the Young Lords, returned with permission to start a New York chapter. And that was the beginning of that street activism organized, where the Young Lords were militant but not militaristic. Despite their stated commitment to armed struggle, they rarely carried guns or sought confrontation with authorities. This is according to the New York Times obit. Instead, Mr. Guzman encouraged them to stage dramatic actions to embarrass the city into action, like the time they liberated, some say stole, a truck full of equipment used to test for lead poisoning and tuberculosis, both scourges of the city's poorest neighborhoods. So it sounds like, Saul Alinsky's Rules for Radicals. They did a kind of street theater. They did a kind of PR subversion of the media. The group always claimed inspiration from communist China, and over time their commitment to Maoism deepened. In 1971, Mr. Guzman joined a delegation of 70 Black and Latino activists on a months-long trip to China. But he also reacted to the increasingly sectarian drive among other Young Lord leaders. and to the growing commitment of resources to Puerto Rican independence, efforts he felt that eroded their connections to everyday New Yorkers. He served 9 months in federal prison in Florida for resisting the draft. That's how real the draft was. That's how real Vietnam was in the 70s. Guzman in 74, he's just 24, returned to New York to find the organization utterly transformed after his prison time. Even the Young Lords changed their name from Young Lords to the Puerto Rican Revolutionary Workers' Party, and then he left. And then he started his career in journalism. So I didn't know much of that. I mean, I knew maybe half of that. But I will say this. Pablo Guzman, at 73, was an inspiration to a young Emil Guillermo, 3,000 miles away in California. And I give him my respects. I mean, my career took different turns, but I honor the man who was a model of sorts, because, as I said, there were no people of color in the 70s and 80s. I mean, you were taking a chance that there would be a career for you in broadcasting. And Pablo made it. And I would say he made it in a way that was more reputable than even the biggest star in that group, Geraldo Rivera. So, rest in peace, Pablo Guzman. A lot of these guys going. I don't know, not feeling good about it. All right, tomorrow we're going to talk. I guess we'll come back and see my column in the ALDEF blog, Asian American Legal Defense and Education Fund. Also the Philippine Inquirer, inquirer.net. Emil Amok. A little meditation, because I value doing nothing. Meditation, the art of purposeful nothing. No striving, doing nothing. But starting with the nothingness from inside, from being, well, if it's a loving kindness is the basis of our nothingness. Does that make sense? It's a loving kindness meditation, but we start with ourselves, showing self-love, and then offering to others. It's kind of like a boomerang, right? As you offer it to others, it comes back to you. But it starts with a little feeling of self-worth, self-love, offering it to others, and then it comes back. Oh, wow, how that works out. And so, as I wish for me, I wish for you. May you be safe. May you be happy. May you be healthy. And may you live with ease. Emil Guillermo here. Till next time. Mahal.